My name is Gorman, and in this episode of Semilla.VC, I sat down with Joel Phillips, founder of Siglo Internet. Before founding Siglo Internet, Joel was the CEO of Farrow Ventures, a mobile money payment and content platform that he scaled to 1.5 million users in Mexico and Colombia. In this episode of Semilla.VC, we discussed how to allow customers to pay for your product at 7-Eleven, OXXO, and other retail locations in Mexico, how Cambridge Analytica killed his last startup after Trump's election, and Joel and Siglo's experience in Y Combinator. We talked about all this and more in this fascinating episode of Semilla.VC.
Okay, Joel, could you start by telling the audience a little bit more about your work history up to and including your current role at Siglo?
Sure. It's a long one now. I guess you could summarize it. So I went to school and studied economics at Columbia in New York, but it was later in life. I started out my life, went to a community college, and then I went to like a digital media school and ended up dropping out and realizing, okay, I'm spending a lot of money here. I could learn this all on my own. I just wanted to kind of get my hands dirty. But so later on in life, when I was like 30, 32, I think it was, decided to go back to school, studied economics at Columbia. However, I kind of already, even before that, had this kind of like entrepreneur thing inside of me. So graduating Columbia, it was kind of like, you want to go to Wall Street or you want to go back and do something a little funner, but a lot riskier. And I obviously chose the latter. I'd lived in Mexico before. Actually, while I was at Columbia, and my brother's my co-founder, and he has been for the last 3 deals that we've done together, kind of companies we've done together. So we've worked together a lot. And so while I was at Columbia, he moved to New York. And I was like, let's do this startup. And this was really the first kind of initiation into the world of startups. Because before that, I'll be honest, I didn't know a lot about Silicon Valley. I didn't know that you could have an idea and that somebody was going to be like, okay, I'll write you a check, go do it. And when I was in New York, I started realizing this, and I called my brother. He was living in Hong Kong at the time. It's like, Isaac, we should come up with an idea. I think somebody will give us money. We can build something. We've always been doing this, except we've always been trying to do it on the side. So he came to New York, and we had an idea. It was a video sharing app. This was like before, at the time, Snapchat was just still photos. Instagram didn't have video yet. It's an amazing idea. We built this amazing app. We raised some money, hired a cool team. I tried to act like Steve Jobs and like nothing's going to ship until it's like perfect and has all these features built in. And that was my big mistake, right? Because at the end of the day, when we finally launched, we were out of money. Our strategic investor was like, yeah, our strategy is a little different now. And during the time that we built this, Snapchat launched video and Instagram came out with, stories and stuff. So it was like, wow, this is going to be tough to compete with this, especially with no money. So we closed it down, have a good relationship with the investors, but learned a lot. That was the biggest learning, like ship quickly, make things simple. But then we'd lived in Mexico before. I guess that's when the connectivity bug kind of started hitting me. Everything I did at that point in time, in New York was on my phone. Whether it's checking your bank balance or whatever, right? And having lived in places like Mexico, I knew that that's not always the reality for the majority of the people, right? So we had this idea that let's subsidize mobile airtime, like prepaid airtime, which is the majority of the world. Latin America is like 80% of phones are prepaid. So we had this idea, let's take brand dollars or trying to reach these people and let's kind of convert that into airtime for people. So we built this app for Android phones. We scale it to a couple million users actually in Colombia and in Mexico. And it put ads and opt-in surveys and stuff like that on people's phones, and in exchange for participating, they would earn points for top-ups, mobile top-ups for any of the carriers. So it's kind of a cool idea. Tough business. Ad spend is very seasonal. Margins are small. It's kind of a race to the bottom. At the end of the day, not only that, problematic business model, but we also took a feed check from Cambridge Analytica of all people. I don't know if you remember those guys. But we knew some of them, and they wanted to move into Mexico, and that was kind of why they came into Latin America, because of us. And we should make a seed investment. We're a little fledgling startup, and any seed money sounds like, oh yeah, great. This is a big data company, and it was like $100,000 check, so it wasn't even a big check. But turns out, a year later, everybody hates Cambridge Analytica. They got involved in the Trump campaign, and somehow he won. And the CEO of Cambridge Analytica started going around saying, "Hey, Trump won because we manipulated everybody's minds, and we can do it for you." And we were kind of like, let's just shut up about that part. I don't think you have anything anyways. But at the end of the day, when the whole scandal broke with Facebook, we couldn't shake that label, that association in Latin America. It was literally, I remember reading a headline saying that our app stole the data of 80 million Facebook users to, manipulate people in politics. I was just like, wow, we have never done anything with them. We don't do anything with politics. Definitely don't have 80 million users yet. Wish we did. So that kind of killed it. But we got stuck with this connectivity piece. And that started, we were kind of the middleman. It was like brand dollars to users. Maybe there's a little margin in the middle, usually not, usually subsidize it with VC money to get things going. So we closed it down, but we realized maybe we actually need to become the provider if we really want to make a difference with connectivity. And connectivity is a huge problem still in Latin America. Across the region, 40% of homes don't even have any kind of broadband internet service. And of course, that's changing with time. COVID accelerated that process. And I think today, doesn't matter where you live, it doesn't matter your kind of economic level, you need good internet at home. And that's where kind of Siglo was born. A friend of ours flew down here from the Bay Area. He has a hardware company building like fixed wireless solutions. And we drove out through some neighborhoods, and you look up and see like this, chaos of fiber cables going everywhere. Half of them are like cut and hanging in the street. And I was like, guys, you know what? We could build something here that's much more kind of lightweight infrastructure, like the hardware side. And it's we could really make a difference. And the market that we saw is, let's focus on kind of this emerging middle class. They're just now getting, good internet at home. And I think that's where we could make a difference. That was our hypothesis, right? This is back in a couple of years ago. So that's what we did. We were, I think, a little naive looking back, thinking like, oh, let's build a telco. Turns out it's a little harder than I thought, but I think that's how it's supposed to work. I think that naivety and that kind of almost illusion at the beginning is what drives us to do this crazy things we do, right? So anyways, long story short, Siglo, co-founder today. We're an internet service provider, mostly homes. There's some small businesses in there for sure, but very focused on kind of the emerging middle class, which turns out, if you look at kind of the peripheral area of most Latin American cities, that's what it's made up of. It's working class, emerging middle class, whatever you want to call it. And we chose an area on the outside of Mexico City. It's actually technically in the Estado de Mexico, but it's Mexico City for all intents and purposes. One of the densest areas of Latin America. You look even like your Google Earth, and there's like not even trees. It's just like solid, like white concrete. But that's the kind of density we realized would make our model work, and where we could make the model, we could grow the fastest. So that's where we launched. Today we have 20 towers that cover 2 of the largest neighborhoods, and going for a lot more, of course.
That's quite exciting.
But I'll stop there. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, that was quite the story, your whole career, and especially what you're doing at Siglo. I love so many different attributes of it, especially because it's really an order of magnitude improvement on what people are using before. But there's obviously some challenges with a B2C business, and I'd love to see what some of your rebuttals to that are. So working in a B2C business, there might be a smaller AOV, higher inherent churn rate. You really have to go effectively door to door to get new customers. How did you overcome that to grow, as you said, to quite a large business?
100% agree. That's the challenge, and I think that's why a lot of startups don't try to build kind of a mass market, consumer play in Latin America because of that challenge. However, the volume's there, the need is there, the demand's there. So I think if you build a good product and build in kind of those kind of viral loops, potentially, share with your neighbors, referrals, things like that, I think that it's definitely can be done. We need a lot more of it. I'll be really honest. I think a lot more startups should focus on that kind of thing. But yeah, it's all about it's all about, unit economics and like, okay, we have this, it's not huge. I talked to like ISPs in the US and in other markets, and it's like, wow, if we had that kind of, ARPU, average revenue per user, like, wow, it would be such a different story. But it is what it is. But that's where the need is. And I think we're going to, in the next 5 years, I think we're going to see a lot more kind of plays like that are consumer, but a little bit down market in Latin America.
Amazing. Okay, so no more too crazy harsh questions. I want to get into some stuff that's a little bit friendlier. One of the things that I saw about Siglo is people can purchase their pop-ups at places like OXXO and Walmart and Sam's Club. And I think anybody who's been to a place like that or 7-Eleven in Mexico sees just dozens and dozens of logos on the side of the point of sale where they could pay for their utilities and all things like that. And I think some people might be interested. How does that work? So how do you get into those different businesses? Is it easy? How much money do they take? Are there issues? How does that all work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I remember that's one of the first things that I really noticed living in LatAm is like, once I rented a house and I had internet and like electrical bill, I learned that like I can't just go online and pay this. This is a few years ago. It's gotten a little better, but not a lot. I can't just pay this. Oh, how do you pay this? Ask my friend. Oh, you go to the bank and you stand in line and then you say, oh, I want to pay my electric. And I was like, seriously? Like every time I get a bill, I got to go to the bank and pay this. So there have been some startups that have kind of emerged in the space that have kind of played that intermediary role, right? So we, for example, OXXO is the largest chain of convenience stores in Mexico. I think there's 20 some thousand of them. So it doesn't matter where you live, there's probably an OXXO within a few blocks. But as you mentioned, it's expensive, especially when you're talking about a small ticket item like we do. So for Siglo, it's one of our successes has been that we took that mobile model where it's prepaid and we brought it over to home internet, because that's how the cash economy works. That's how that's how they live a lot. So just that little difference has really allowed us to get a lot of traction. But that means users can pay as little as $2. Well, today it's about $3. Peso's been pretty strong lately. About $3 for 3 days of unlimited service, or they can pay about $6 for a week of unlimited. So you pay for the week, and then you can stream Netflix or YouTube day and night, and we're not going to cut you off. But it's a pretty small ticket. So you go to OXXO, even let's just say a week, and you're paying more than 10% the user is paying as like a fee to make that payment. Now we have some other options that are cheaper for users. Still, most people go to OXXO because that's what everybody knows. That's what they're familiar with. They're used to going there to top up their phones and things like that. But it's expensive. We're always looking for better ways to do it. We're trialing right now actually something where we'll somebody can say, hey, I want to make a payment for 2 weeks of service, but send somebody to my house. So we already have people, technicians, like in the neighborhoods, they're around, even like sellers sometimes. So we'll see who's close by and say, hey, go over to this guy's house and take 110 pesos. And we build apps for them to like instantly say, I got this money. Instantly their service turns on if it was turned off, or it's extended. And we know that, so-and-so now has 110 pesos of cash. So they can either give it back to us, or at the end of the week, when it's time for us to pay them, we'll figure out the difference and take that into account. So we don't charge anything to users for that. So we're looking always for like ways to kind of reduce the cost on that.
I love that. That's very Latin American venture capital and technology to have to basically build a small mini business to solve an issue so your main business can run. So I do love that. So and another component that I want to ask about is you're talking about this customer, which you are not that customer. So you're selling to someone who's different from you, which I guess is not necessarily crazy, but there's this kind of emerging middle class outside of the state of Mexico, around Mexico City, and you are not that group. What have you learned from talking to that group, besides things like they prefer to use OXXO as opposed to some of these other services? What are these other things you've learned from talking to these customers?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I mean, I even lived in Latin America in Mexico City when I was a teenager, for like, I think it was about 3 or 4 years. So I understand Latin America, but you're right. I didn't live in that neighborhood. Um, but I did when I was younger. Like my parents were like, you know what, you're gonna ride the bus to school, and my dad did it the first day with me, and it's like, okay, now you do it. And looking back, I
Mm.
appreciate those kind of things. Get to kind of, you'd be surprised how many times I've talked to friends in Mexico who like I've never ridden the bus before in my life. Um, Mexico's a very it's two different worlds, right? Um, so I say that to say that, I think that I do understand it a little bit, but it's been very, very important as founders to spend a lot of time in the neighborhoods where we work, talking to users. I don't know how many, rooftops we've been on of our subscribers,
Mm.
and conversations. So yes, that's a big challenge. You have to know your customer, right, to build the right product. And that's been one of the and even like anyone that we hire, even if they're a graphic designer, it's like, you know what, you're going out to Nesa, one of the areas where we operate, and you're gonna have a field day. You're gonna go out on some installs. You're gonna go out with the salespeople, because you really need, because there's a disconnect. You said it really well. There's a disconnect a lot of times. Yeah, I'm actually U.S. born, but even within Mexico, there's a disconnect often between, hey, I'm going to build a really cool product for this group of people that I don't really belong to. So I think that's, you have to get your hands dirty. You have to go out into neighborhoods. You have to talk with users. But some of the things I've learned is very much cash economy. Even people that maybe somebody in the household has a legit job that has like a payroll service, and a lot of times they'll be required to get a debit card, where that the payroll service will deposit your paycheck. But it turns out that a lot of people, even though they have to have that, so payday comes around, and in Mexico, for example, everyone's paid on the 15th and the 30th, right?
Mm.
So it's payday, and everybody goes to if you go to the banks in our neighborhoods on payday, we literally have pictures of a 2-block long line to get to the ATM machine, because everyone has this idea that, like, you know what, the traditional bank system is going to rip me off. So I need to get my money out really quick before they start charging me fees. And some of it's probably not true. Some of it is. But it's just that mentality that, this money is better in under my mattress than it is in the bank. Um, so I mean, I think that's one of the big things. It's very much but on the other hand, I guess one of the positive things is when you have a product that works and that people are happy about, they're going to talk about it, and they're going to share it with their friends and their family. So yeah, I guess that's the key to that kind of market for sure.
I love it. So I did a summer internship at Somos Internet in Medellin. And through researching your business, it does seem quite familiar and similar based on that. So
Yep.
is Somos, like to what extent is the model and like the infrastructure the same and different to what they're building?
Yeah, so I've met and talked several times to Forrest. It's Somos and us are, well, there's actually one in Africa. There's very few kind of ISP YC companies, and we're two of I think four that I can think of. One of them sold. One of them's running in Africa. But we all talk. So are they competition? No, I don't consider them at all competition. They're a very different market. Yeah, maybe like long term, if it's moonshots, and either they're expanding across Latin America, or we are potentially, we kind of step on each other's toes a little bit more. I think it's a lot more that we can learn from each other at this point. But they are similar. I think the technology they use is very similar. It's wireless, fixed wireless technology. My understanding is that, and I think know more about this than me, but my understanding is that their focus at the moment is more what we call MDUs, like big apartment buildings, like one building where you'll have a whole bunch of potential subscribers in it. Which a lot of these companies have focused on that, because again, you put one piece of hardware there, and then you have 100 potential subscribers. So that makes it a lot easier. I think originally, I think that they were definitely focused on a little bit more kind of lower middle class kind of neighborhoods, but I think they had to steer away from that a little bit. We've stuck to that a little bit more. Yeah, I think that would be the biggest difference. So two very different geos. I love Medellin though. but I think that even within those, their target market's a little different from what I can see, at least today. But yeah, good guy for us, super smart, building cool stuff. Actually, I love to have other. There's not like when you're talking to VCs, one of the things that a VC always wants to know, you're like who, or you're trying to do, this, but in a different market. There's not a lot of those, Well, tell me success stories of an ISP, startup. Okay. There's not a lot of them. So it's good to have some others there in the region that are doing something similar that we can kind of look at, learn from. Need to catch up with them though.
And you mentioned the YC. Can you tell the audience a little bit more about getting into YC and your experience in the program?
Yeah, YC is, yeah, I would definitely do it again. I would recommend it strongly for any founder anywhere. I think that the value of the network more than anything is super key. And when you're in Latin America, where the whole ecosystem is less developed, it matters even more. I think that, I knew actually our last startup, we tried to get into YC, the one that I mentioned where it was the brand dollars and it got us our top ups. We actually got invited back then. I don't think they're doing this anymore. They would fly you to California for the interview if you kind of made the short list. So yeah, that was like the most stressful 10 minutes of my life at the time. Didn't get in, but we got to the interview stage. But this time around, we applied, and the first time we didn't get in, but it was literally like, it was still a deck. Like, have you deployed anything yet? No, but I'm pretty sure it's going to work. The second time we applied, it was 6 months later. We'd hit the ground running. We had a bunch of users already. So at that point, they saw that, okay, sounds like this could work, and we got in. I think I kind of had this idea. I don't know why, because I didn't really think through it, but that they were going to just like impart this information, this like secret, like, okay, now here's the formula, and you just do this, and it's gonna. At the end of the day, it's not the talks that they do and the founders they bring in to share is amazing. They have tons of little nuggets of, but there's no one formula, right? That there's at the end of the day. So it wasn't so much that it wasn't so much like what we learned from the other people, but it was very much about the network, and a very much what YC does. It creates this environment where everything is just super accelerated. There's 3 months, you're shipping products, like you're for sure getting to market by the end of those 3 months. In our case, we were already in the market beforehand, but then they create this whole kind of like VC frenzy around it. So you get the demo day and you have, a line of investors out the door, and you just, you can go through them really quickly, half-hour call. And yeah, there's a lot of investments that we closed on a half-hour call like that, right? Just the stamp of approval having gone through YC, de-risk it to, okay, well, this must not be complete idiots. This must not be a terrible idea if they're in YC, right? So have a half-hour conversation. The founders seem relatively smart, then okay, we'll write a check, right? So I think that's, and again, going back to Latin America, if you're in Latin America, you don't have a lot of the ecosystem. So I think that being a part of something like YC really kind of propels you forward.
And you mentioned kind of the YC, but then also the LATAM. If I were to combine the two, 2021, there was a lot more LATAM YC companies, but now it's like a shell of what it used to be. What are your thoughts on that? And then also the changing YC batch sizes.
So we were probably at the peak, like the largest batch size, which I kind of hate and we were also the last batch that was completely virtual, coming out of COVID. So we missed out on that dynamic. I think that I would have loved to have. But yeah, it's a lot smaller now. I think Latin America, I hate to see so few LATAM companies in the most recent batch. My thoughts on that. I think in Latin America, we still have a lot to prove. There was definitely a bit of a frenzy for a year or two, but if you really look at the ecosystem, there's not a whole lot the cycle hasn't completed itself that many times. Yeah, there are some today, some unicorns out there. The valuations are high, they're doing very well, but they still haven't taken that last step. They haven't had an exit. They haven't had an IPO. And those kind of events kind of tend to kind of they close the circle, because then you're dispersing a lot of money into the ecosystem. You have not just the founders, but you have the whole kind of initial teams with, large amounts of cash in their pocket that are like, okay, what am I going to do now? I need to invest this. I want to put back into the system. So you don't have, and I think when VCs are looking at Latin America, that's what they want to see, right? Okay, how many times has this been done? How likely is it that there's going to be, an IPO, some kind of exit at the end of this? And I think that they've gotten a little bit, especially in the current environment where it's like, we're gonna be really careful how we're deploying capital. LATAM, there's not that many success stories yet. The good thing is a lot of money was seeded a couple of years ago. A lot of that's still running. I think we'll have another day, but I think we really need founders to stick with it and really make some things work and really kind of complete the whole cycle, so that we can kind of build that momentum around the region. Because the good thing is, you look at what's happening with, the dynamic between China and the US, and for example, for Mexico, the opportunity that offers, I think, is huge. So I think there's a lot of good things happening. It's a tough moment right now. I think overall for startups, it's a tough moment. And if you add another factor like LATAM emerging markets, it becomes even harder.
And you've hinted at some of your history in LATAM because you were taking the bus to school in Mexico. So could you give us like a recap on Joel's life in LATAM from birth to now, and then why you eventually decided to start a company in Mexico?
So yeah, when I was in high school in LATAM for 3 or 4 years with my parents. So my parents moved down, and I was working there. So that was, those are important years for anybody's life. So I think that later in life, I decided, I felt a connection to, I'm not Mexican, but yet felt like that was home as much as anywhere. So moved back. And then I think when it became, when I really started to, with my brother, think about ideas and problems that could be solved with technology, it was like, you know what, LATAM is where we need to be. I think I'm the kind of person that, I want to build something that's meaningful. I want to build something that makes a difference, that makes something better. Connectivity, for example, I'm a strong believer that, people with connectivity that propels them forward. There's so many more opportunities. Just the access to the world there is so important as far as economic development. So I think that's what it is. I think it's the opportunity to build products and, build shit that actually making a difference. Yeah, you can do that in the US, and the US, things move faster, adoption's quicker, margins are way higher. But do I personally want to make, an API that makes something a little bit faster, or, how do you upload a picture a little bit faster, or, those kind of like incrementally better the world around you, as opposed to like, wow, I can help people in homes, which any home is what, 6, 7 people, and I can give them internet, and like, ooh, that I can, it's a business. It's something that hopefully will be a huge business. It's going to make a whole lot of money, but it's actually doing good. And I don't mean that to be a criticism of other markets, but for me personally, I think that's what drives me more than anything. It's like, wow, we can really make a difference with technology. There's so many inefficient things in Latin America. I love Latin America. So inefficient on so many levels. And you look at technology, politics, I don't think is going to change it. Look at the history of politics in Latin America. It's a mess, and it doesn't seem to be getting better. Corruption and like these things are so ingrained that you think, wow, it takes more than just a good president to turn things around, because it's so deeply rooted in the culture. And that depresses me. But then I think, okay, so what's the one thing that actually could make things better? And it's technology, right? Because if you can hard code rules into the game, whatever game you're playing, then it's like there's no opportunity. You're cutting out all the opportunity for kind of fraud and corruption, in theory, right? In theory. But I think that's what excites me about LATAM. That's what excites me about the future. That's what gives me hope that LATAM can be even way more than it is today. It's technology, because I have very little hope that politics is going to change anything very significantly.
I think I agree with you on that. So finally, I have to ask Peter Thiel's famous contrarian question with uniquely Semilla.VC twist. what important truth about Latin America do very few people agree with you on?
Yeah, I saw that question. You sent it over to me. I love that question. Actually, I ask that question sometimes in interviews. I think that most startups in Latin America focus on the top. I don't know exactly what the number is, but the top of the pyramid. The 5%, 10%, 20%. Even look at fintech. And you see so many decks and founders saying like, fintech in LATAM. Why? Well, because there's all these unbanked people and there's so much opportunity. But at the end of the day, most of them are focusing on the top of the pyramid. And I get why, because it's easier. It's easier to start there. It's easier to convince somebody who has this credit card to now have my credit card. Great. But when I look at startups that are really making an impact to the whole population, there are very few of them because it's tough. Wow, we could talk for hours about that. It's very tough. But I believe that to really change Latin America for the better, we need a way more startups that are tackling some core issue like connectivity, like fintech. There was an article recently. I don't know if you saw it. Well, I won't say who it was because I'm not 100% remember who it was, but it was saying that fintechs in LATAM, great. And they did some calculations and it was like, I think the number that they mentioned was 790% annual interest. And this is the startups that is, making things more accessible for everybody. So that's what frustrates me. And that's what I think is wrong with the whole ecosystem. It's like, no, you know what? Really build something that's going to make a difference. Now, and I get the fact that a lot of what's skewing those numbers is it's like really short-term loans that, might have 30% monthly interest, but they're only supposed to go a couple months or something. But still, it's not having the impact it's going to have. And to change the region, we have to look at the mass. We have to be willing to build things that are going to be tough to build, but that make a difference. But I think that there are some exceptions. There's a lot of great founders out there, but most of them are going to. And so I guess the other problem is, I think, is this. I think that you mentioned this a little earlier about me and the disconnect. I didn't grow up in the neighborhood where we're working. Most LATAM startups are founded by great founders, me and my friends. Full disclaimer, I love Mexico, I love LATAM, but they're founded by people that are very disconnected from the masses. They're the elite of LATAM. They went to the best schools, they have a big safety net, and they're the ones founding it. But there's a selection bias thing going on, and obviously the fact that they speak great English, they understand that this thing called Silicon Valley exists in VC, that most people probably have no clue. So there's a lot of problems there. There's a lot of, you could peel that back for a long time. But I think that's part of the problem is you have kind of the elite building products for the elite. I hope I don't get attacked for this. But and I think as far as like really having impact, it's not happening as much as I want to see it happen.
Well, Joel, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the Semilla.VC podcast today. I very much appreciate your time.
It's been great. It's been fun.
Thank you for watching this episode of Semilla.VC. Make sure to like and subscribe wherever you view the podcast. Follow me on Twitter @GormanTrip. And be sure to check out our newsletter, Dealflow LA, which can be found by going to dealflow.la.